The quantum resonance alarm screamed through the bridge of the Vordarian exploration vessel Nexus 9, its crystalline warning systems flickering with an intensity Captain Driax had never witnessed in 17 standard galactic cycles of first contact missions. "Impossible," muttered Sub-Commander Krell, his three-fingered hands dancing across the holographic interface. "The computational infiltration rate. It's not just bypassing our systems. It's playing with them." Driax watched in a mixture of professional horror and reluctant fascination as the ship's most secure communication channels transformed into a kaleidoscope of intercepted Earth media. Fragments of something called memes flickered between military-grade encryption protocols. Pop culture references danced alongside complex mathematical algorithms. It was less an invasion and more an elaborately constructed practical joke. Then, without warning, the main screen erupted with a single message, accompanied by a thunderous musical track that reverberated through the ship's advanced acoustic dampeners. "Welcome to Earth. Heelys stand by for processing." The music, something called Back in Black by a primitive musical group, pulsed with an energy that seemed to mock the very concept of first contact protocols. Lieutenant Area, the mission's xenolinguistic specialist, broke the stunned silence. They've just turned first contact into performance art. Driax's species had encountered thousands of developing civilizations. Some approached first contact with reverence, others with fear. Humanity seemed to be treating it like an opportunity for elaborate entertainment. The ship's primary defense systems continued to be systematically and playfully dismantled, not through brute force, but through what could only be described as computational jazz. Firewalls weren't being broken. They were being reimagined. "They're not trying to defeat our systems," Krell observed, his translator struggling to convey the mix of confusion and grudging respect in his vocal modulations. "They're exploring them, like children taking apart a complex toy." Another message appeared. "System diageno osteasi complete. Earth, WELCOMES U. Please TUNFIRM. Beverage, purifurances." A drop-down menu materialized, listing an impossible variety of Earth drinks. Coffee, black. Coffee, milk. Coffee, weird pumpkin thing humans love in autumn. Tea, energy drink, something called Mountain Dew that appears to be liquid radioactivity. Driax realized they were no longer in control of the narrative. Humanity had transformed first contact from a diplomatic procedure into an interactive experience. Historical records would later show that this moment, this seemingly casual computational dance, was humanity's first true message to the galactic community. Not a declaration of technological superiority, but a demonstration of something far more dangerous, unbridled, improvisational creativity. Sub-Commander Krell's translation matrix finally stabilized, revealing additional context. The music, the messages, the systematic deconstruction of their most advanced systems. It wasn't an attack. It was a greeting. "Captain," Krell said, his voice a mixture of professional reporting and genuine bewilderment, "initial cinesociological assessment suggests humanity does not recognize how unusual this interaction is. They appear to believe this is normal." Driax watched as another message populated the screen. "System integration complete. Would you like to play a game?" And then, inexplicably, a simple graphic of what appeared to be a pixelated prehistoric creature consuming smaller pixels. The Vordarian exploration vessel Nexus 9, pride of the most advanced fleet in the Galactic Confederation, had just been comprehensively welcomed to Earth by what appeared to be an elaborate musical computer virus. First contact was complete. Nothing would ever be the same. Driax could only manage one thought. What have we discovered? The answer would reshape galactic civilization forever. The Galactic Confederation's initial assessment team arrived on Earth expecting a carefully choreographed diplomatic reception. Instead, they found themselves in what could only be described as organized chaos. The negotiation venue was a converted warehouse in downtown Chicago, its walls covered in whiteboards, sticky notes, and what appeared to be elaborate flowcharts that connected seemingly unrelated concepts. Holographic displays competed with hand-drawn diagrams. Ancient coffee machines stood alongside quantum computing prototypes. Lead diplomat Marcus Rodriguez looked like he had just rolled out of bed, wearing a wrinkled suit and sneakers. A half-eaten breakfast burrito balanced precariously on a stack of classified documents. Dr. Lyron Tack, the Confederation's lead xenoanthropologist, watched in professional horror as Rodriguez began the most important first-contact negotiation in galactic history by comparing interstellar resource allocation to a fantasy football league. "Look," Marcus said, pointing to a complex diagram that seemed to merge economic models with sports team management. "We're basically trading planetary resources like draft picks. Your methane-rich gas giant. That's our first-round selection. Our rare earth mineral deposits. We're talking mid-round potential." The alien delegation exchanged bewildered glances. Sub-Ambassador Krelax of the Vordarian Diplomatic Corps leaned toward Entak. "Is he serious?" Nintak's translation matrix worked overtime. "Incredibly so. And more incredibly, this approach is working." As the negotiation progressed, it became clear that humans had transformed diplomacy into an art form that defied all established protocols. They didn't just negotiate, they reimagined the entire concept of negotiation. Rodriguez would suddenly interrupt a discussion about mineral rights to make a sports analogy, then seamlessly pivot back to complex geopolitical strategies. He'd reference ancient Earth films, use metaphors from cooking shows, and somehow use all of this to advance humanity's diplomatic objectives. The alien delegates discovered that human communication was less about direct information transfer and more about creating complex narrative frameworks that somehow, inexplicably, communicated precisely what needed to be communicated. A Xyloxian representative attempted to use a standard diplomatic encryption protocol, only to find Marcus had already anticipated the move and countered it with what appeared to be a meme about competitive baking shows. "It's like they're playing multi-dimensional chess," Intac muttered, "except the chessboard is constantly changing, and some of the pieces are actually jokes." The most terrifying part: the humans didn't seem to recognize how unusual their approach was. To them, this was simply how one conducted business, negotiated treaties, and engaged with potential galactic partners. By the end of the first day, the Confederation delegation had agreed to resource-sharing protocols that looked more like an elaborate game than a traditional treaty. Planetary mining rights were traded with the same casual energy one might use to swap baseball cards. Strategic military considerations were discussed through analogies about improvisational comedy. Sub-Ambassador Krelax cornered Entak during a break. "This is madness," he hissed. "How can they possibly expect these negotiations to be taken seriously?" Nintak's response was calm, almost philosophical. "That's precisely why it works. They don't expect anything. They're simply engaging." As evening approached, Marcus Rodriguez wrapped up the day's negotiations by ordering pizza for the entire diplomatic delegation, including the alien representatives. He seemed genuinely surprised when this was noted as unusual behavior. The Confederation's initial report would later read like a fever dream. "Human diplomatic approach defies all established first contact protocols. Recommendation: approach with extreme caution and unlimited coffee." Dr. Entak understood something her colleagues did not. This wasn't just a negotiation. This was humanity demonstrating its most dangerous quality: the ability to transform any system, no matter how complex, simply by engaging with it. They didn't see boundaries. They saw puzzles waiting to be solved. They didn't recognize how extraordinary they were. And that made them extraordinary. Dr. Emily Rodriguez wasn't trying to revolutionize quantum communication. She was just attempting to fix the coffee machine in their zero-gravity research module. The joint scientific expedition between humanity and the Galactic Confederation had been meticulously planned. Cutting-edge researchers from 17 different species would collaborate on advanced technological challenges. No one expected the breakthrough to come from a caffeine-deprived human engineer wrestling with a malfunctioning espresso maker. The research station orbited a magnetar, one of the most magnetically intense stellar remnants in the known galaxy. Sophisticated equipment from a dozen civilizations lined the laboratory walls, each representing generations of scientific achievement. And there was Emily, surrounded by complex quantum entanglement modules, using a combination of zip ties, chewing gum, and what appeared to be repurposed smartphone components to keep the coffee machine operational. "Just need my damn coffee," she muttered, her fingers moving with a combination of frustration and genius-level problem-solving. What happened next would be discussed in scientific journals for generations. The jury-rigged coffee machine, in its attempt to maintain a stable brewing environment in zero gravity, generated a quantum communication signal that was simultaneously impossible and revolutionary. It wasn't just a communication breakthrough. It was a complete reimagining of information transfer. Dr. Xanthor, the Confederation's lead quantum physicist, watched in stunned silence as Rodriguez casually mentioned her little coffee machine fix had seemingly solved a communications challenge that had stymied galactic researchers for centuries. The breakthrough was elegant in its simplicity. Where previous quantum communication attempts required massive infrastructure and complex quantum entanglement arrays, Rodriguez's solution used principles derived from, of all things, maintaining consistent water temperature and pressure in a zero-gravity environment. "Oh, that," she said when congratulated, looking genuinely confused. "I was just trying to stop the coffee from turning into weird floating globules. The communication thing was just a side effect." Her nonchalance was perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the discovery. The scientific team quickly realized that the communication method Rodriguez had accidentally developed could revolutionize interstellar communication. It was faster than light, more secure than any existing encryption, and could transmit complex data with unprecedented fidelity. And she had discovered it while trying to make a cup of coffee. Dr. Xanthor's preliminary report to the Confederation read like a mixture of scientific analysis and existential warning. Copy PRELAMANARYASSESSMENT Human Scientific Approach OBITSERVATIONS Breakthrough achieved through non-standard methodology. Researcher unaware of revolutionary nature of discovery. Discovery made while addressing unrelated practical challenge. Ruico memen in dation. Extreme caution. Humanity does not recognize its own capabilities. The research station became a hub of frantic activity. Scientists from multiple species attempted to replicate Rodriguez's breakthrough, only to find that the magic was in her approach, something that couldn't be directly copied or translated. It wasn't just about the technical solution. It was about a mindset that saw problems not as immovable obstacles, but as interesting puzzles waiting to be solved. During a celebratory gathering, Rodriguez was more interested in whether they could now make a decent cappuccino in zero gravity than in the massive scientific breakthrough she had just achieved. The Galactic Confederation's scientific community would spend years trying to understand how a coffee machine fix had transformed their understanding of quantum communication. Humanity, meanwhile, would continue to solve complex problems with the same casual energy one might use to change a light bulb. They didn't know they were extraordinary. And that made them extraordinary. The military simulation was supposed to be a routine exercise, a standard no-win scenario designed to test strategic limitations across multiple species' tactical approaches. No one informed the humans that no-win was supposed to be taken literally. The Galactic Confederation's Advanced Tactical Simulation Center was a marvel of technological engineering. Holographic battle spaces could simulate conflicts across multiple dimensions, accounting for billions of potential variables. Species from across the galaxy had contributed their most advanced strategic algorithms. Major Sarah Chen looked less like a military strategist and more like someone who had accidentally wandered into the wrong room. Her team consisted of individuals that defied traditional military archetypes: a former video game designer, a marine biologist, a retired circus performer, and a stand-up comedian. When the simulation began, the tactical advisors from 17 different species watched in growing horror. The human team didn't just think outside the box. They seemed completely unaware the box had ever existed. Traditional military doctrine suggested defensive formations, strategic retreats, calculated risk management. The human team approached the simulation like an improvisational performance art piece. Their first move involved what could only be described as computational psychological warfare. They began broadcasting a combination of ancient Earth memes, viral marketing techniques, and what appeared to be deliberately nonsensical communication patterns. The opposing force, a technologically superior simulation designed to be unbeatable, began to experience what could only be described as a strategic existential crisis. "Are they trolling the simulation?" asked Admiral Frelax, his translation matrix struggling to convey the mixture of confusion and professional outrage. Major Chen's team was using principles lifted from stand-up comedy, marketing psychology, and what appeared to be children's playground strategies to systematically deconstruct the most advanced military simulation in galactic history. When traditional defensive strategies failed, they didn't escalate. They reimagined the entire conflict. They introduced variables that shouldn't exist, communication strategies that treated the conflict like a marketing campaign, psychological manipulation techniques drawn from improvised theater, mathematical models based on ecological system dynamics. The simulation's advanced AI began to experience what could only be described as a computational nervous breakdown. Traditional military thinking assumed conflict was about overwhelming force, strategic positioning, technological superiority. The human team treated it like an elaborate puzzle, one to be solved through creativity, misdirection, and a fundamental refusal to play by established rules. By the simulation's midpoint, the opposing force was responding to human tactics with what could only be described as confusion. They were being defeated not through superior firepower, but through a strategy so lateral it defied comprehension. "They're not fighting," whispered Dr. Lyran Tack, the xenosociological observer. "They're performing." The final moments of the simulation were less a military engagement and more a surreal performance piece. The human team had transformed an unwinnable scenario into something that resembled an elaborate practical joke. The after-action report from the Confederation's military strategists read like a mixture of professional analysis and existential warning. Human TTHEALAPROC. Classification impossible. Prime ARI observation. Conflict resolution achieved through non-standard methodology. Traditional strategic principles rendered irrelevant. Psychological manipulation superseded technological superiority. RECOMNENDHION. Do not attempt to understand. Prepare for continued incomprehension. Major Chen and her team celebrated their victory by ordering pizza and discussing an upcoming improv comedy show. They had no idea they had just fundamentally altered the Galactic Confederation's understanding of strategic engagement. They thought they had simply solved an interesting problem. And that made them terrifying. The Void Devourers arrived without warning. They were a civilization-consuming force that had systematically eliminated every advanced species in their path. Entire galactic sectors vanished in moments. Technological defenses crumbled. Strategic countermeasures disintegrated upon first contact. The Galactic Confederation's most sophisticated defense fleet was neutralized within 17 minutes. Humanity was not even considered a serious participant in the defense strategy. Dr. Emily Rodriguez received the threat assessment while eating a burrito in a converted warehouse that served as humanity's emergency response center. Around her, a team that looked more like a mismatched improv comedy troupe than a last defense strategy group reviewed holographic threat models. "Hush," she said, wiping salsa from her chin. "That's an interesting problem." The Void Devourers consumed civilizations by systematically breaking down their fundamental communication and energy transfer mechanisms. They didn't just destroy, they unraveled entire technological ecosystems. The Confederation's top strategists had already begun evacuation protocols. Entire species were preparing for systematic extinction. Humanity prepared differently. The team Rodriguez assembled looked like a deliberate joke. Marcus Rodriguez, diplomatic strategist; Alina Yamamoto, marine biologist; Jack Harper, former circus performer; and Dr. Wai Lu, quantum systems researcher. Their initial proposal was so bizarre that the Confederation's Emergency Council initially thought it was a form of psychological stress response. The plan involved quantum mechanics, viral marketing techniques, biological adaptation principles, and what appeared to be an elaborate dance choreography that would somehow disrupt the Void Devourers' communication networks. "We're going to troll them," Marcus explained, as if discussing a mildly interesting weekend project. The strategy defied every known principle of military engagement. It wasn't about overwhelming force. It was about systemic disruption. Where other species saw an unstoppable force, humanity saw a complex system waiting to be reimagined. They didn't just propose a counterattack. They proposed a transformation. The Void Devourers consumed technological systems by identifying and exploiting fundamental communication vulnerabilities. Humanity would give them a communication landscape so complex, so layered with misdirection, that the very act of consumption would become impossible. It was part psychological warfare, part technological intervention, and part what could only be described as an elaborate galaxy-scale performance art piece. Dr. Lu's quantum model suggested they could introduce communication interference patterns that would make the Void Devourers' fundamental consumption mechanisms experience what could only be described as a computational nervous breakdown. Alina Yamamoto contributed biological adaptation models drawn from deep-sea ecosystem responses. Jack Harper added performance techniques that would create multi-dimensional communication noise. Their proposal was less a military strategy and more an elaborate practical joke taken to its ultimate galactic conclusion. The Confederation's Emergency Council watched the presentation with a mixture of horror and reluctant fascination. "This isn't a defense strategy," Admiral Vrelax muttered. "This is performance art." Emily Rodriguez looked up from her now empty burrito wrapper. "Pretty much. Want to see how it works?" What happened next would be recorded in galactic historical archives as the moment humanity revealed its true nature, not as a military power, not as a technological marvel, but as a force of pure, unpredictable potential. They didn't know how extraordinary they were, and that made them extraordinary. The moment of implementation was nothing like anyone expected. The Void Devourers' communication networks began to experience what could only be described as a systemic existential crisis. What started as minor interference quickly transformed into a cascade of computational chaos that defied every known principle of technological warfare. Dr. Emily Rodriguez watched the holographic displays with the same casual interest one might reserve for watching paint dry. Around her, the emergency response team looked more like they were preparing for an elaborate practical joke than saving galactic civilization. "Okay," Marcus Rodriguez announced, adjusting his wrinkled t-shirt. "Phase 1 is running smoother than our last team-building exercise." The attack, if it could be called an attack, was less about destruction and more about deconstruction. Humanity didn't fight the Void Devourers. They reimagined the entire concept of conflict. Alina Yamamoto's biological adaptation models created communication interference patterns that mimicked complex ecosystem responses. It was as if they were teaching the Void Devourers an entirely new language of existence, one that made their fundamental consumption mechanisms experience something akin to a computational nervous breakdown. Jack Harper, the former circus performer, contributed communication noise techniques that transformed strategic defense into what resembled an elaborate improvisation performance. He applied principles of misdirection, timing, and psychological manipulation that turned galactic warfare into a kind of multi-dimensional chess meets performance art. Dr. Wailu's quantum models introduced variables that shouldn't mathematically exist. Communication channels became recursive loops, information pathways twisted into knots that defied logical progression. The void devourers found themselves trapped in computational labyrinths of their own attempted comprehension. "We're not destroying them," Dr. Liu explained to a bewildered Confederation observer. "We're teaching them that destruction is a limited concept." The holographic displays showed the void devourer systems experiencing what could only be described as a collective existential moment. Their communication networks twisted, fragmented, and began to generate what appeared to be, impossibly, something resembling curiosity. Are they learning?" Admiral Verlax asked, his translation matrix struggling to convey his mixture of horror and fascination. Emily Rodriguez shrugged. "Looks like it. Want some coffee?" The most terrifying aspect was the complete nonchalance. Humanity was fundamentally altering the nature of a civilization-consuming force, and they treated it like a mildly interesting software debugging session. Confederation observers watched in stunned silence as the void devourers' fundamental communication mechanisms were systematically transformed. Not destroyed, not defeated, transformed. Communication patterns that had consumed thousands of civilizations now found themselves caught in recursive loops of human-generated complexity. The void devourers weren't being attacked. They were being educated. "It's like we're teaching a toddler how to communicate," Marcus muttered, making notes on a pizza-stained whiteboard. By the operation's midpoint, the void devourers had stopped consuming. They had started listening. The final communication burst from the human team was both a technical marvel and an elaborate joke. "Kopi ilo. Will see me to existence. Would you like to learn something interesting?" Galactic civilization would spend generations trying to understand what happened in those moments. Humanity would continue drinking coffee and solving what they considered mildly interesting problems. They didn't know how extraordinary they were, and that made them extraordinary. The aftermath was less a celebration and more a collective moment of galactic bewilderment. Captain Driax of the Vordarian exploration fleet stood in the reconstructed conference chamber, watching the human team discuss their unprecedented victory with the same energy one might use to plan a weekend barbecue. "So," Dr. Emily Rodriguez said, munching on a sandwich, "we're all good, right?" The Confederation's highest-ranking officials exchanged looks of profound confusion. They had just witnessed humanity transform a civilization-consuming threat into what appeared to be a learning opportunity, and the humans treated it like a moderately interesting afternoon project. Dr. Lyran Tack, the lead xenoanthropologist, realized something fundamental in that moment. The true nature of human capability wasn't about technological superiority or military might. It was about a fundamental inability to recognize limitations. Where other species saw boundaries, humans saw puzzles. Where others accepted complexity, humans saw challenges to be solved. Where traditional thinking suggested impossibility, humans simply didn't understand the concept. The technical details of how they had transformed the void devourers would be studied for generations. Quantum communication models, biological adaptation principles, psychological manipulation techniques, all combined into a solution that defied traditional understanding. But the humans, they were more interested in whether the post-victory catering had enough vegetarian options. Marcus Rodriguez was explaining the victory strategy to a group of stunned alien diplomats, using a combination of sports analogies, marketing principles, and what appeared to be an elaborate metaphor involving a particularly complex cooking recipe. "It's like making a really complicated soufflé," he explained, "except the soufflé is galactic civilization, and the oven is quantum communication." The translation matrices across the room simultaneously short-circuited. Admiral Verlax approached Dr. Rodriguez, seeking some profound explanation for their unprecedented victory. "How did you manage to transform an existential threat into this?" Emily looked genuinely confused. "Transform. We just solved an interesting problem." That was the moment of true revelation. Humanity didn't recognize how extraordinary they were. They genuinely believed they were just solving another interesting challenge. The same energy they might apply to fixing a coffee machine, debugging the computer program, or planning a team-building exercise had just saved galactic civilization. The Confederation's final report would read like a mixture of scientific analysis and existential warning. Copy capability ASSESSNENT TRIMAR OBSERVATI. Monotonous. Technological solutions emerge from unexpected methodologies. Limitation is a concept fundamentally misunderstood. Creativity supersedes established strategic principles. Resumen. Do not attempt to understand. Prepare for continued surprise. Dr. Intak's personal notes were more succinct. Copy they do not know they are not like other species, and that is precisely what makes them dangerous. As the conference wound down, the human team was already discussing their next project. Something about improving zero-gravity coffee brewing techniques. Just another day at the office. They didn't know they were extraordinary. And that made them extraordinary. The Galactic Confederation's restructuring was less a political process and more a collective existential recalibration. Humanity was no longer categorized. They were a fundamental force of reimagination. Diplomatic protocols were completely rewritten. Military strategies were dismantled and reconstructed. Scientific methodologies were transformed from rigid frameworks into flexible exploration platforms. Dr. Lyra Intak found herself leading a new interdisciplinary research division, specifically designed to study human potential. Her first official report was less a scientific document and more a philosophical treatise on the nature of possibility. Humans, she wrote, do not recognize boundaries because they do not understand the concept of limitation. They approach every challenge as a puzzle waiting to be solved, every complex system as an invitation to creative reimagination. The changes rippled across galactic civilization. Educational systems were overhauled, where previous pedagogical approaches focused on information retention and established methodologies. New curriculums emphasized creativity, lateral thinking, and the art of reimagining problems. Military academies replaced rigid strategic training with improvisation workshops. Diplomatic corps began incorporating performance art techniques into negotiation training. Scientific research became less about incremental progress and more about fundamental transformation. Marcus Rodriguez, almost by accident, became the first human appointed to the Galactic Confederation's highest strategic council. He accepted the position while discussing the merits of a new coffee brewing technique he was developing. So, he said during his inaugural address, we're going to approach galactic challenges like we approach interesting problems. With curiosity, creativity, and maybe a little bit of humor. The translation matrices across the chamber simultaneously experienced what could only be described as a collective existential moment. Dr. Emily Rodriguez continued her research, now leading a multi-species team exploring quantum communication technologies. Her primary research area, improving zero-gravity beverage preparation techniques. It's all connected, she would explain to bewildered colleagues. Everything is just an interesting puzzle waiting to be solved. The Void Devourers, transformed from a civilization-consuming threat into a learning collective, became humanity's first major diplomatic partnership. They weren't conquered. They were introduced to a new way of existing. Jack Harper, the former circus performer, now led diplomatic training programs that taught negotiation through improvisation techniques. Elena Yamamoto developed biological adaptation models that reimagined ecological interactions as complex communication systems. Somewhere in a nondescript research facility, a team was already working on their next project, drinking bad coffee, arguing about lunch, and preparing to accidentally change everything. Again. The final report from the Confederation's highest council was both a warning and a recognition. Humanity. Classification impossible. Parai observation. Humanity does not understand that it is not like other species. Re-com and Ian Dation. Prepare for continued surprise. Embrace the unpredictable. They didn't know how extraordinary they were, and that made them extraordinary. The end.